Hi, welcome to the channel. It's IT and Automation, where we like to talk about all things IT and automation. Today, I'm going to cover some of the topics around cluster roles in Kubernetes. In the past, around the Kubernetes topics, we have talked about security best practices available in this link in here. I'll put it down in the description. We talked about tools like using K9s, which I will be using today as well. We talked about some troubleshootings. We talked about groups. Now today I wanted to talk around aggregated roles, cluster role in Kubernetes. To understand aggregated cluster role, we got to understand what is role. In RBAC or in general in Kubernetes, cluster role defines what sort of permission or what sort of additive permission that user or group or service account will carry when user or group or service account is assuming that particular cluster role. Role itself contains the rules and represents the set of permission. As I said before, cluster role is not much different here. Cluster role is in a non-namespaced resource. Where we talk about non-namespaced resource, we are talking about anything as API, service, command will list, right? Namespace resource would be likes of anything that sits inside the namespace, so pods, deployments, replicate. What is cluster role? Cluster role is a cluster-wide resource, and it is defined at cluster scope. And how does cluster role look like? If I may give an example of role API version, which will be rbac.authorization.ktest.io v1 currently, and becomes role, which is the resource type. This is the API version, and metadata with namespace should belong to and name my test role. And then here is a set of permissions that we are talking about, which goes in, say, API groups, which would be likes of API group can be, this is an API group. Here, let's say we want to give in all things API group resources. Let's say we want to give access to pods and pod logs. It's pod logs. Could be wrong, right? But you'll get the essence out of it rather than the actual working copy. I'll make it working copy. We will fix it, and then I'll put it in a GitHub, and then attach those links into the description as well. So verbs is likes of what you are allowed to do. Right? Here we will be get a list. That means you can do kubectl get pods, and you may also need likes of watch here. With this set of roles, you will have permission on my own namespace. Let's say this, for instance, right? If you look into this role essentially allows you access in this given namespace resources such as pods and pods log, do get, list, and watch. This is role, right? In order to go towards the aggregated cluster role, which is the main topic, we will look into roles and cluster roles, right? And how does cluster role look? It's no different, right? Cluster role would look like, let's go here, that cluster role difference is you will have cluster role. This is not a namespaced resource, right? This is a non-namespace resource. So my test cluster role, just for the clarity, right? Let's say this is my cluster role, and then API group would be all, and what is likes of secrets, right? And you say you want to access any secrets, or you can say namespace itself. You may have want to access across all of the namespace, or it could be anything around admins and webhooks, mutating webhooks. So if you give this permission, you have access to this given namespace, these permissions. And in this case, what you have done is you have given this permission across the board. So any namespace as well. This includes any namespace. That's what the difference is between cluster role and cluster roles and roles, right? And for these to work, you would also create corresponding bindings. So that will be role binding and cluster role binding. Here, I'll provide this in a GitHub as well with the GitHub links. So here, role binding. So how does the role binding look like is you basically need to say which user I want to give access to and which role, right? For instance, let's say that I've got role binding perspective. So I'll copy this for the sake of ease. I'll copy this and then we'll tweak it as we need, right? The API service group is same again, role binding, cluster role binding, and this becomes the kind becomes role binding. Metadata, it is going to be on the same namespace. My test role binding for not to get confused. That's that, and then we will say in here it will have subjects and it will have role ref, basically, right? What does this mean? This means you are going to attach subject to the role reference. Role reference is kind role name. Which role I'm going to attach that binding to is this role in here, and that role, and API group. Oops, if I can type, API group will become this, right? We don't specify version. We just need to specify API group. So here now, this role I want to bind this role to with subject. Subject becomes bind user. Let's take an example of user, right? And which user name could be IT and automation, and in here it will be again API group. Which API group? Right. So essentially what you did here is you attach this role to this user. So this user is going to get access that you have described in here when a user with this subject binds in to Kubernetes. That's essentially what is role binding. And imagine what cluster role binding. Cluster role binding would be pretty same too, right? What you can also do is you can role bind to the cluster role as well, right? This could easily be bind or let's do this role ref, and also do multiple, right? Cluster role, my test cluster role, that you could have attached like that as well, single or double to give it everything, right? So that is role binding, how it works. You could bind with a role, you can bind with a cluster role. This can be groups, this can be service account, right? Anything. But the core gist around this is namespace, right? Role binding belongs to the namespace. In exactly same way, if we look into cluster role binding, what happens here is this resource. By now you know the sequence of how you write these manifests, right? Here this becomes a cluster role binding. Namespace goes away because this is a cluster wide resource. Well, let's give it a different name, and here let's say it is a cluster role. What would you normally do? You just groups or services, right? And then say IT and automation managers, want to give access to that, and then given that is a cluster role, let's stick on the cluster role here, right? And then cluster role is that. This is basically a cluster role. So once you create role, once you have a role or cluster role, and you bind that to given user or service or group, you basically have referenced a permission to certain groups or users, okay? And as I mentioned on the previous this groups video, when you have existing group, it will find that additional permission to the existing group, or it will create a new group, which also brings the risk of escalation, but we will not go into that side of things. Please go and have a look around groups video that I have attached in the link. So here we briefly touched upon role, cluster role, role binding, cluster role binding. Now to the main topic, right? Aggregated cluster role. So how aggregated cluster role works is, let's start in here, aggregated cluster roles, right? How aggregated cluster role works is you basically combine, say, you have role 1, you have role 2, you have role 3, right? And you have a parent role. Or should I say this? Should I create a canvas for a moment? New canvas. Here we will say aggregated cluster roles, right? So how this works is, say you have a base role, you have let's say you have a base role, which becomes an pretty empty role. I will not redo the work. I will basically go here and copy that snippet, and let's say we have a base role of if I can do what I have in my head. So here, this is cluster role. We say my test base role, right? And then the rules, let's keep the rules empty for now. Base role, and what we will add in here for an aggregated cluster role is, okay, let's not go towards that. Let's see as a plain role first, right? So this is a base role, and I want to create another role which has a bit of permissions, right? So do I still have a copy pasta? Let's do copy pasta from here. Here, let's do that, right? And a bit more room in here. So API service that cluster role that my test cluster. Let's say addition to base, right? This is the role we want to add to the base role. So the way it connects this alongside this is basically what the aggregated role is. But how does that actually work, right? You do not keep on changing things. You can do not, maybe for various reasons, right? I can talk about several reasons here. If you do not want to keep on changing this role and you want to extend, you want that modularity, right? You want that flexibility to extend something from this role to another role, yet you want to give additional permissions. You do not want to change that. It could be for specific reasons, and then you want to take that permission away. Could be various reasons, right? Could be because different team manages a different kind of roles, and you are a reviewer, and you allow that kind of roles. You have some sanity checks around, and you will allow cluster role aggregation. It could be very maybe some of the lame hypotheses here, but so here you create this role, you want to enhance this role. How does that actually work is with the aggregation role. So it's not different to the role, it's cluster role itself or the role itself, but here you have this annotation called aggregation rule. Aggregation rule comes with say cluster role selectors, and it will say match label, and obviously you aware of Kubernetes resourcing and definitions. This is the match. This is the selectors, right? This is the selector where you say match label something and then aggregate to the role. You may already get a hint around here. So with the cluster role aggregation role, you have this field called or this attribute called aggregation rule, which has cluster role selector. Which selector do you want? If it matches our label. Label could be my org com and aggregate to base role. If you see any role, basically what you are doing here is you are giving an instruction to APIs to control plane API saying if you see any role with this label, you extend the permission of these rules to be what that role brings. In this case, the lower one. So here, for this role to work, you basically add a metadata labels. Now here you are saying my.org.com aggregate to best role equals to true. As soon as API server sees this label, which matches the selector in here, the corresponding role, the overall role will look like that plus this. And this is done by field manager called controller. There is something called aggregator controller. Will manage this one here, field manager aggregator controller. So that what manages the field, and it's pretty mature. I think it started from 1.16, if I'm not wrong. So it's a quite mature feature, right? So this is how you can aggregate the roles, and we talked about aggregating roles, right? And this is just an example. You could also, okay, let me make it a bit more meaningful by adding another role in here, right? So here it could be this plus this. This guy, his name could be addition to the base monitoring, right? And this could be addition to the base, and then this guy could be saying I want to monitor cron tabs, or I want to monitor cron tabs. So essentially this guy's permission will include this plus this, and that's how the aggregated role would look like. And anytime you can detach this rather than having to change that, it's more of a plug and play, right? More plug and play here. And there could be a question of doubt in a mind where you may say, oh, hold on then, anyone who has a cluster role create permission, they can essentially exploit this by creating a cluster role which matches that label, right? You've essentially escalated permission of this guy. So why would you want to do that, or how would you control that, right? So two different questions there. Why would you do this approach is, again, use case. There are various reasons. Now, how would you control that? Would be you can have admission policies where you do not allow to have labels that like this. There are a bunch of admission controller, right? Admission controller or admission hook, which says, okay, which just checks, right? Kubernetes 1.30 comes with all sort of policies, which is the upcoming version about to be released when I record this video. And there are other tools like OPA, Open Access Agent, likes of Kyverno, who deals with as an admission controller, right? Which can do the kind of checks around and not allow some of the groups or users who has a cluster role creation permission, but they should not be doing this kind of resources. So that can be done. So going back to the aggregated role, so how would this aggregated role look like, right? Let's do that. And I'm actually not sure if I can copy paste that. I can copy paste the component contents from here, but not quite that, right? So aggregated role, that was the primary role in here. We created these two roles, these two roles and base, and we said secrets and that, right? So essentially this would finally look like let's do that, and it would finally look like rules, blah, that, phone tabs. Oh, I'm not sure if I'm helping with the zoom, but yeah, this is how it would look when it is created. There will be some hidden metadata as well. Hidden metadata would be, if I'm not wrong, there will be something called build manager. But yeah, we can apply this and look into it, right? So could we try to apply this? Yes. Okay, here we go. And I can find this. Right, so I'm in here, aggregated role, that's where I was working at, aggregated role.md. This is the role. If I create a snippet out of this, this, I hope it works, right? Want it to work. Cluster role. So what are we creating? We're creating cluster role, and essentially this, right? We just need this part here, the lower block. Okay, so vi cluster role cluster agz cluster role.yaml, and I will do cut that down, cut that down, cut that down, da 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 da. Let's create da 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 and da da da. Okay, so here what I'll do is oh, my indentation is gone pretty far away here, right? Okay, so let me do this. I should have. I'm doing pretty lame style, right? That's not. This is just slash. I'll be that, and let's talk about this now, right? This cluster role, I want to create this cluster role, and aggregated role here, that, and that match label, I think that's correct, and true, right? That if I do this, I should have a role which will work as aggregated role, base template, right? Okay, do that. kubectl apply minus f that. Okay, that role got created. Let's see, kubectl get roles. Okay, kubectl get roles, cluster roles. In fact, cluster role minus a ref minus I my test role base. Let's see, first of all, right? Oops, doesn't have cluster roles. Cluster, of course it wouldn't, right? Cluster roles. Cluster role. kubectl get cluster role. Cluster role. That's the role. Here we go. So there is a kubectl cluster role. kubectl get cluster role. Blah minus OYAML. If we look into that, it is empty rule set, right? Rule set null. Now, because of that aggregator, let's say is that YAML, and then now we enable this guy here. So this kind metadata that we want this metadata, we want this label, and then we will say da, and our rules will look like this, right? So if I apply that now, if CTO apply minus F, it will say configured created, right? And then get cluster role. Now let's look into that previous cluster role. Oop, look at that, right? There we go. It has added that permission, right? And if we look into another role now, say we add this role, separate role. I'm doing pretty lame. I should be using that ID or anything, right? But never mind. That. If I apply that, there we go. So we basically added all of the roles together, right? Pretty neat, right? So yeah. So that's what I wanted to talk about, how this aggregated role works. And in order to make aggregated role, we looked into cluster role bindings, right? But essentially that is what is aggregation. Aggregation rules and aggregated rule, and this is an aggregation rule here, which made it possible. We still have, if I jump into K9S and so cluster roles here, you will still see addition to the base, addition to the monitoring, and that, right? That has full, that has base only, that has monitoring only, that has both secrets and cron tab. Yeah, that's how aggregation role works. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll come back with similar videos next week. Thank you. Bye.